did you first get involved with Mary's Place? What was your role?
When Mary's Place was founded, I had been the pastor of the Church of Mary Magdalene for a couple of years. And the board and I and the women worked together to launch Mary's Place. So it was really before the launch.
Great.
As we were listening to the needs of the community.
What's your favorite memory of Mary's Place? What a moment, interaction, experience that stands out to you?
I think my favorite memories, and this is going to be generic, not one moment, are when the women would come together to plan something, or to celebrate something, or to organize a meal, as they began to take significant responsibility for their life together. And sometimes those were times of celebration, sometimes of lament, but seeing their relationships deepen, and also seeing that circle open to welcome new women, I think were the most touching and important aspects of the early days for me.
What impact did you see Mary's Place have in the community during the time you were involved?
I think I want to step back and talk a little bit about the before times, if that's all right. I came into the Church of Mary Magdalene before Mary's Place as following the founder, Jean Kim. And they already had established a culture of hospitality and of mutual support. And Jean, as a pastoral leader, had also established a practice of listening to the needs of the women, and also of being very collaborative in the larger community of people doing work in Seattle. So those two things were already in place as Church of Mary Magdalene was moving into its second pastor leadership. So I stepped in, put on this stole. I came in February of 1998 from being a pastor of a small Methodist church on Whidbey Island. So kind of the opposite of the streets of Seattle, but with a strong sense of call, as Jean had when she founded the church. That this was the next chapter of my ministry. I had it was Thanksgiving weekend in 1997, so just this week that I learned that the board had decided to hire me, and I took that great leap. So I showed up on Saturday morning, and the women began to teach me. Right, so just picking up from Jean that ethic of listening to them, not assuming that I knew anything, and I really didn't. And I would visit the shelters a couple of days before Saturday, and invite women to church. That's another practice I picked up from Jean, but also sit and have a cup of coffee, even brave the smoking room, to just hang out and listen to what was going on with their lives and understand the context in which they were living. So that sense of connection, both with the women themselves and with the ecosystem of shelters and other services, is something that was established early on, and it really resulted in the idea of Mary's Place. Am I getting ahead of your questions?
No, perfect.
Okay, let me keep telling the story then.
Okay.
So one of the places I would visit, and one of the places the women who came to church on Saturday would frequent, was Angeline's. And it was getting terribly, terribly overcrowded. This was in an older facility, not the beautiful one they have now. And it was so crowded it really jeopardized their ability for it to feel safe and like a daytime home for the women. We had only a very small weekday program. We had an arts and crafts group that met midweek. We had a Bible study, but we didn't even have a place for it, really. We were sharing offices with Real Change in Belltown and only had our space at First United Methodist Church on Saturdays for our worship service. So there wasn't much we could do to help that situation. I, on behalf of the women who were expressing their needs, took that to the Church of Mary Magdalene board and said, we need to start thinking about what we can do. We eventually got permission to lease what became our office space and what was our Saturday church space all week from First United Methodist. So we moved the office, and we were able to then think about that space as something that could begin to start a second place of day refuge for the women. And the board, for their part, and because I told them that we needed it, started looking for funding to hire another staff person, another full-time staff person, to begin to develop this, because I was clear it was beyond my capability as the pastor, because that included a lot of work out in the community with other congregations that were supporting us. And we had a board member who was an executive at Boeing, who was able to get us an initial grant to do the launch with enough to hire a Mary's Place launch person. And I think we used the term program director at that point, but also a little bit more to do some renovations. It was a day space only. It was a shelter at night. So the furniture we gathered had to be pushed up against the walls. So we did a search, and Marty was recommended as an applicant for that job, Marty Hartman, by Michelle Marchand, who was at that time and still is the organizer for WHEEL, an organization of homeless and formerly homeless women. It just had its 30th anniversary this month. And Marty had worked at one of their shelters at the Free Methodist Church in Maple Leaf, and she had really close knowledge of what homeless women were going through, so she was interviewed both by the board and had some interview time with representatives of the women as well. And she was chosen out from 2 finalists. There was one other to begin Mary's Place. And she picked up on the kind of organizing methodology and ethos that was part of leadership already. So rather than sitting down and thinking what she might design, she went out to the shelters. She started hosting movies and short-term events to listen to the women about, if we were to start a place here for women during the day, what would you like it to be? And it picked up on some of the values that were being kind of submerged at Angeline's because of the overcrowding, about mutual care, about respecting the wisdom and the creativity and the capability of the women. Their idea was that they would take part in running their own program in a significant way. And also the values of community, of friendship, of mutual support that were already part of the Church of Mary Magdalene.
Wow, that's a great history. Thank you. How have you seen Mary's Place change over the years?
Well, the changes I saw during my leadership time, I left in the middle of 2006, were a gradual expansion of our ability to serve the women. So we started out, I think, 2 days a week, trying to start slow to build a culture that could then expand. And we were able then to add time to where by 2004, I believe, we were at 6 days a week. So 5 days of Mary's Place. And then the church on Saturday, which wasn't open a full day, but had always included cooked breakfast, and then 2 hours of church, the first of those hours being singing, because Jean Kim knew that that was a good source of healing and community building. And then an hour of church, and then a big meal afterwards. So it was a half day, really. And those things, I think, were successfully established, those values in the culture of Mary's Place. And Marty really led that. But the truth is, there were a lot of those women who've been part of the church for a long time, who came to Mary's Place, some of them who had found housing and still wanted to come back and give back. So they too were a bridge to bring those values from the church into Mary's Place. If I can, I'd like to read the Church of Mary Magdalene Affirmation of Faith, because I think, although it's couched in specifically Christian language, I think it picks up on some of those things that shape the culture of Mary's Place and really lasts until this day. So this is what the affirmation we used in worship every Saturday. We who are homeless or suffering from multiple difficulties believe in God, who created and blessed women equally in God's own image. We affirm God is a loving and forgiving God, not a condemning God. Therefore, we refuse to be treated as inferior and less worthy human beings. We loudly affirm that we deserve to dream a vision, hope, and future. We re-image Jesus Christ as a forgiving and healing mother, father, sister, brother, friend, and savior, who himself was homeless, abused, and killed on a cross. We affirm Jesus' resurrection as a mirror of our own healing from our poverty, homelessness, brokenness, bondage, and destructive thoughts and actions. We affirm the Holy Spirit as our source of strength and inspiration, who empowers us to get up after every fall. The Spirit constantly leads us back home to God. We affirm our gathering as a worshiping community that must practice love, joy, peace, forgiveness, security, and support for one another. Amen. I think you can see the threads of connection that are still there, insisting on the dignity of each homeless person, and has expanded to family, not just women, but everyone who is in need of hospitality and a path towards home.
Thank you for sharing that. And this may be a little redundant, but what was one event or time period that you remember that's particularly important to the history of the organization?
I've talked a little bit about the launch, and of course that, from the Mary's Place perspective, is really the key one. But I think I want to talk a little bit about the larger ecosystem and the spirit of collaboration. When I came to Seattle to take up this position, put on this stole, which by the way says "End Homelessness" on it. It's not just a clergy decoration. I learned very quickly, as people reached out to me, that there was a spirit of very dedicated teamwork among people providing services to homeless women and men in Seattle. So I think the first outreach was from WHEEL, the homeless and formerly homeless women's organizing project, which asked me to come in for an interview. And they told me in the women's own voices what they were doing, their history, and then they had a few questions for me. They were checking me out. I had outreach from Rick Reynolds at Operation Night Watch, from Nair Ernest at the Compass Center, he was the chaplain there, from Craig Rennebaum, who was the mental health chaplain, just walking the streets doing his ministry. And Angelines was and the YWCA as a whole were very cooperative. Noel House, the staff and leaders of those organizations wanted to connect right away. And that, of course, was because I was stepping into connections that Jean had already established. And this is a moment, though it was a year. Mayor Paul Schell decided he was going to announce that the city would get all the homeless women and children off the streets by Christmas one year. And so the city allocated a bunch of money for an emergency response. And they assigned a staff person from Human Services to call together some of those people I've already named and others, to listen to people providing services about where the gaps were. You see the replication of that spirit of not assuming you know from the top down. So we had the big organizations like the YWCA and the Salvation Army, and Compass Center was there. Catholic Community Services was there, and then the little players like me from Church of Mary Magdalene, to decide, and we really decided with the city Human Services Department how this money was going to be allocated to start Hammond House, a new Compass Center shelter, to start the Women's Referral Center, so women had a place to go to get sorted out each night into the beds that were still available. The YWCA committed to opening Angelines at night for shelter, and the Salvation Army committed to opening a new women's shelter. So to see that sense of common purpose, it was a really great time as people came together to meet these crying needs. All the women and children did not get off the street by Christmas. But I think that's an illustration of the atmosphere of those early, the early aughts. I don't know that I could say that still exists, but I'm pretty distant now from the actual service provider level of things.
Which leads me to this last question, which is, where would you hope to see Mary's Place go directionally in the future?
The exponential growth since I left was a big surprise to me. So I don't really know what I can say because I have to caution myself to think nothing is too big to dream, right? So because of that listening mode, what's the greatest need now, and the spirit of collaboration, who are the partners we can pull in, what are the resources we can scrounge or ask for, that's how Mary's Place began to grow into doing shelter, family shelter, and all the amazing things that have happened. So presuming that spirit continues, listening to the women, to the families, to the kids, to those who aren't quite homeless yet and need a way to stay in their homes, to those who are seeking it. If that stays in place, and then if the boldness to ask for community partners to step up, not just in the human services realm, but corporate partners and foundation partners and governmental partners. If those things continue, I think the next big piece, and I'm going to bring my United Methodist Church retired clergy self into this right now. We have a number of churches, and I'm sure this is happening in other denominations, churches in Seattle and in the surrounding cities that are beginning to think about how they can develop some of their property that's bigger than they need to provide low-income housing. We had an early example of that when Compass Center developed a project in Shoreline with Ronald United Methodist Church in Hopelink, that's now Ronald Commons. So we have nonprofit developers who are able to do some of that, but there's particularly a need for family housing, as Mary's Place well knows. If there's an opening and a need for collaborating, particularly with these congregations that are bringing new property into the mix, I couldn't dream that Mary's Place could find the resources to develop some things.
Yeah.
Building on relationships that go back to before Mary's Place, so when those church women's groups were bringing dinner to Saturday services. There's a particular resonance, I think, between those mostly Christian faith communities and Mary's Place because of those long established roots.
Yeah, full circle.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing your memories. This has been really terrific. Is there anything else you'd like to share for this history project before we end this interview?
I guess I cast a little doubt on the spirit of collaboration there a few minutes ago, but I want to say, just having been at the Wheel 30th anniversary last night, that these really long-running organizations that have that kind of organizing spirit at their roots are still entwined with each other. You know, Marty was there. Women who were part of Mary's Place early on were there, and that connection with the self-organizing and mutually empowering relationships of homeless women with each other, and their influence on the direction of Mary's Place and many other things in this community endures. And it's to be celebrated as a precious resource that many communities don't have.
Great. Thank you so much.